and welcome to this special broadcast, Prime Minister Modi in Singapore. I'm Sakal Bhatt. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Wednesday arrived in Singapore to deepen strategic partnership with the Southeast Asian country at the invitation of his Singaporean counterpart Lawrence Wong after wrapping up his historical visit to Brunei. Now remember, today it's the day 2 of his Singapore visit. Prime Minister will receive an official welcome at the Parliament House and also call on President of Singapore, along with the very important and crucial bilaterals that are scheduled for the day reportedly. We will be getting you live visuals and live reportage from Singapore and also examine the broader spectrum of the relationship and the significance of this visit of Prime Minister Modi to our nation, with subject experts joining us on this very broadcast. So let's begin. So the second day of the Prime Minister Modi's Singapore visit will begin with a ceremonial welcome at the Parliament House of Singapore. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will later hold bilateral meetings with the Singaporean counterpart Lawrence Wong. Prime Minister Modi and Singapore Premier Wong will be holding talks to review the progress of India-Singapore strategic partnership. The talks will also focus on ways and means to drive forward cooperation in the wide range of areas and build on the meeting last month of the India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable, which added advanced manufacturing and connectivity as the new areas of collaboration. The two leaders will also exchange views on regional and global issues of mutual interest. Prime Minister Modi is visiting Singapore, as we mentioned earlier, at the invitation of his counterpart Lawrence Wong. DD India's Akshay Dongre joining us live from Singapore to tell us about the engagements of day 2. Akshay, good morning. Over to you. Now, it's business on agenda that forms the crucial part, and particularly the bilaterals that the two nations are going to be inking today. But overall, what is expected today?
Well, it's going to be a jam-packed schedule for the Prime Minister, Sakal. In fact, as we speak, the Prime Minister is expected to leave anytime soon for the Parliament of Singapore, where he will be meeting the leaders of Singapore. Then after that, there is also a meeting scheduled with the business leader. There will be a round table. Prime Minister is expected to visit semiconductor plants, and industry leaders they will be meeting the Prime Minister as far as India's own push of making India a manufacturing hub for semiconductors is concerned. There is also going to be other bilateral engagements with business leaders in several fields: the digitization, connectivity, health, skilling of workforce is on the agenda. So as far as the two countries are concerned, as we have seen that they have regularly engaged with each other. They have developed a new mechanics to meet on regular basis. That is called the India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable that in fact took place a few weeks back, and that involved 4 ministers from Indian side and 6 ministers from Singaporean side. So there is a lot of enthusiasm, not just in Indian diaspora that is living here in Singapore, but also among the business industry to have a higher collaboration with their Indian partners, as well as other opportunities that they may get as far as the government of India's efforts to bring the two countries closer are concerned. So it's going to be a tight schedule for the Prime Minister. Meeting after meeting are going to take place, and Prime Minister, as we have seen him on these kind of bilateral visits, Prime Minister will be making most of his time in engaging with the leaders at the political level, along with the business level as well.
Singapore has been a crucial factor as far as India's Act East policy is concerned, and also very significant when the ASEAN narrative, our own regional narratives, and then your relationship with ASEAN is concerned. This is Prime Minister Modi's first in his third historical term, and also holds true for the Singaporean counterpart. In that sense of term, remember the MEA said that this relationship is all set to take the ties to the next level. So in that sense, Akshay, what is really on expected lines, a broader spectrum of India-Singapore ties?
Well, the two countries are, in fact, maritime powers. If you look at India, in the Indian Ocean region, and we look at Singapore, that is, in fact, a city-state, but a very crucial port as well. In fact, one of the most developed ones, which in the ASEAN region, in the Southeast Asia region as well, one of the largest port. And that is something that India is also looking to learn from. The smart city projects that are going on in India have a lot to learn from the way Singapore has managed the city as far as public transportation is concerned, garbage disposal. So it's very interesting, Sakal, that Singapore is using most of its garbage that the city is producing to, in fact, further its land. So they are processing this garbage and, in fact, using it to enhance its own territory at the at the maritime borders. So that is providing more opportunity for the Singaporean government to expand further towards the oceans, towards the south. So that is one aspect which is quite interesting. Semiconductors is the biggest agenda today. India, in fact, is looking at partnering with friendly nations on this aspect. Singapore has an experience of 56 years. That's not a small experience. Over 5 decades of working on semiconductors. Today, semiconductors are the building blocks of the technology as we know it. Almost everything from cameras to this mic that I'm holding to almost everything, cell phones, automobiles, everything depends on semiconductors. Singapore is a leader. About 10% of the GDP of Singapore depends on semiconductor industry, and that is something India is looking at partnering with. So that is the business, business level talks that are going to take place. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is himself expected to visit certain semiconductor plants. Then at the political level, you've rightly mentioned that the two leaders hold a special bond. In fact, Lawrence Wong has taken over as the Prime Minister of Singapore in May 15th. On May 15th this year, Prime Minister Narendra Modi started his historic third tenure shortly after in the month of June. So as far as this meeting is concerned, it is taking, Prime Minister's Singapore visit is concerned, taking place after 6 years. The last visit took place in 2018. And, reminding our viewers that the first 4 visits of Prime Minister Narendra Modi after he took over office took place in his first tenure. There was a gap of about 6 years, and now this visit has once again rejuvenated the ties between the two countries that also hold a very special cultural bond as well.
You spoke about the cultural bond, and the India-Singapore relationship also has a very important dimension when it comes to the Indian diaspora there, particularly Akshay, you would agree the exponential increase that we have witnessed in the last 7-8 years or so. There's a huge chunk of IIM and IIT's alumni who have made Singapore their home, and in that sense, the Indian diaspora, we've seen how Prime Minister Modi was given a rousing welcome yesterday, but Indian diaspora in the bilateral relationship, important?
Well, absolutely. In fact, it is the soft power of India that has fostered the relations between the two countries. So now we are looking at several dimensions of this soft power. One of the 4 official languages of Singapore is Tamil. That's an Indian language. Then we are talking about a chain of restaurants and eateries that have opened up, cropped up, and are quite hugely successful, not just among the Indian diaspora, but also among the Chinese origin people that are living here, the Filipinos, the Malay people. So, it has become...
These are the visuals of the ceremonial welcome at the Singapore Parliament being accorded to India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the presence of Lawrence Wong, the Prime Minister of Singapore. Live visuals from Singapore Parliament. Remember, today is day 2 of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Singapore. Ceremonial welcome at the Parliament House in Singapore.
तो ये तस्वीरें प्रधानमंत्री
On the second day of his visit, Prime Minister Modi will be meeting the Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Senior Minister Goh Chok Tong. That is scheduled later in the afternoon today. He is also going to be calling the Singapore's President Tharman Shanmugaratnam. That is also one of the important meetings scheduled for day 2. But on your screens, Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi's day 2 visit. The morning today, he's being accorded red carpet ceremonial reception in the Parliament of Singapore in the presence of the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lawrence Wong. Prime Minister Modi and Singapore Premier Wong will also be holding talks to review the progress of a broader spectrum of India-Singapore strategic partnership. The talks are expected to focus on ways and means to drive forward this cooperation in a wide range of areas and also build on the meeting that took place last month of the India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable. After the ceremonial reception at the Parliament House of Singapore, meeting with the Prime Minister of Singapore one-on-one is expected, followed by the exchange of important memoranda of understandings, an important component of the day 2 of Prime Minister's Singapore visit. Later today in the day, Prime Minister of India will be visiting the facility of AEM Holdings Limited. He will be accompanied by the Prime Minister of Singapore in Serangoon. On your screens, visuals of Singapore Parliament. Ceremonial reception being accorded to the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, in Singapore. Remember, this is his 5th visit to island nation, Prime Minister Modi's 5th visit to Singapore. But this one, the 5th one, coming after a long gap of 6 years, an important and a critical visit. On your screens, visuals from Singapore Parliament. Prime Minister Narendra Modi signing the visitor's book in the presence of Prime Minister of Singapore, Lawrence Wong. Lawrence Wong, the Prime Minister of Singapore, has recently taken over as the Prime Minister in the new regime. And this is Prime Minister Modi's first visit in his 3rd historic term to Singapore and 5th to the island nation. Both leaders will be visiting the semiconductor facility of AEM Holdings Limited. An important pact on semiconductor is also expected to be inked or signed by 2 nations. Also on the agenda of day 2, roundtable of CEOs to forge closer trade and investment ties. On your screen, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi signing the visitor's book at the Parliament of Singapore. The talks from both sides are expected to focus on ways to drive forward cooperation in a wide range of areas and also build upon the parameters that were discussed in the meeting last month of the India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable, which has also added advanced manufacturing and connectivity as the new areas of collaboration. Second day of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Singapore visit today began with the ceremonial welcome at the Parliament House just a while back, and this on your screens is Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi signing the visitor's book. In fact, India and Singapore share a long and distinguished history of people-to-people exchanges and already a robust mechanism of intergovernmental talks is already in place. We will be also joined by special guests on the broadcast, but right now on your screens, visuals of Prime Minister Modi in Singapore Parliament signing the visitor's book in the presence of Singapore Prime Minister. Delegation level talks, bilaterals. Prime Minister Modi in the presence of high-level delegation including Foreign Affairs Minister, Minister of External Affairs Dr. S. Jaishankar and National Security Advisor, among other dignitaries. Bilateral meeting taking place as we speak, the visuals of which are on your screen. The Indian side being led by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Singaporean side being led by the Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. Prime Minister Modi and Singapore Premier, along with the delegation, holding talks to review the progress made so far as India-Singapore strategic partnership is concerned and the way forward. The talks will also focus particularly on the new areas of convergence and collaboration during this particular visit of Prime Minister Modi to Singapore, particularly in advanced manufacturing sector, connectivity and semiconductor. Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, former Secretary MEA, is joining us on the special broadcast, followed by also we have Professor Swaran Singh, Foreign Affairs expert, joining us on the broadcast. Guests on our screens, please. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much, both of you. Ambassador, to begin with you, this is important, very critical, considering we are looking at collaborations and convergences between India and Singapore in new areas, particularly semiconductor. How do you see this adding more substance to the broader spectrum of India-Singapore ties?
Singapore relations have always been rather special and unique. The beauty of this relationship is that it has always been future-oriented. Singapore, as you know, is a market leader, ahead of the curve kind of economy within the ASEAN framework. And the kind of relationship that we have developed with Singapore over the years has really focused on that future-oriented aspect of it. And therefore, it is no surprise that the areas that we're going to be focusing on this time are also looking at how not only India-Singapore relations improve and add weight to the India-ASEAN context, the India-Indo-Pacific context, but also in terms of how our economy develops. Because very interesting confluence where the growth of geoeconomics is also influencing geostrategy. And Singapore, as you know, is a huge balancing power in that region. So the focus will obviously be on the economic aspects, and I'm very happy to see that the digital world is entering this in a much more concentrated manner. Our work with them on semiconductors, on the fourth industrial revolution, new industry, as they call it, will be the key areas. But we're also looking at human development. So skills be a very important aspect of this as well, because it's going to be an important element not only for the old industry and old services, which India and Singapore already have collaboration in, but also particularly now in new industry. I think the third element, which is very important, is that balancing aspect of Singapore.
Okay.
is our lead partner for the FTA that we have with ASEAN. And I'm sure there will be some discussions on that which will be carried on in the ASEAN framework, and also the general geostrategic developments in the region. So a
Right.
very important visit.
So, geostrategic developments in the region, Professor Singh, India's regional narrative has now, the way it has broadened up as far as the entire Indo-Pacific construct is concerned, the timings of this visit, this is crucial?
Indeed, Singapore is a very unusual relationship of India. Since India moved to look east and then to act east and then to act far east, Singapore has been unusual, strong, very deep-rooted relationship that India has had. For example, ASEAN is a very good trading partner of India, but 30% of trade of ASEAN is with Singapore. In fact, as the ambassador mentioned of the relationship being future-oriented, let me underline what makes it sustainable in that sense of future-oriented relationship. Whether it is 4th or 5th century cultural, commercial relations of India in the entire region, then of course during Chola's time of 10th century, during colonial times, these parts of Southeast Asia, including Singapore area, were governed from Bengal presidency. That explains why 10% of Singapore's population is that of Indians, why Tamil is one of the official languages, it is on their currency. So that kind of unusual, historical, deep-rooted relationship that India shares with Singapore makes it really a very, very multifaceted in so many sectors, whether it is maritime security, defense cooperation, economic relationship, people-to-people relationship, political relationship, strategic partnership. There's a whole wide range of relationship that we have had with Singapore. Now, since world is getting increasingly concerned with semiconductor chips, and we know that Singapore again is a powerhouse. 9 of the 15 world's top chip building industries companies are present in Singapore. I think about 10% of chip exports happen from Singapore. So as India is trying to stake claims in manufacturing of semiconductor chips, Singapore can then be very important partner for skill building, for components, for training, for learning all kinds of best practices. And Singapore is more than willing to engage Indian market, Indian economy, because India is growing 8+%. So in that sense, it's also complementary relationship where both Singapore and India are looking forward to not just expand and make it widespread,
Yes.
but also, as Ambassador said, make a more future-oriented relationship.
Yes, future-oriented relationship. And Ambassador Bhattacharya, if you could just dwell upon the complementarity between the two nations. Singapore, India's largest source of FDI and largest trade partner as far as the whole ASEAN framework is concerned. What makes this particular visit, the 5th one of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, what sets this more, significant and apart from the earlier visits?
On the very basis of the relationship is a very strong understanding between the two sides about how we collaborate bilaterally and how we participate in regional and global issues. And this comes across through the political understanding. And for over a long period of time, and you notice that this time Prime Minister will be having meetings not only with his counterpart, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, but also with Senior Minister Lee Hsien, as well as the Emeritus Senior Minister Goh Chok Tong, who were the previous ministers of Singapore. And this kind of establishes the very long-term political understanding that exists between India and Singapore side, which lays the foundation. But this foundation is developed very much further by very strong economic ties. And the economic ties have developed over a period of time in which we have complemented each other. So as you mentioned, Singapore is not only today the largest source of FDI. I think last year it was close to about 12 billion, and the accumulated stock of FDI from Singapore is about $170 billion. But our trade with Singapore is also amongst the largest that we have, probably the 6th largest trading partner that we have globally, and of course the largest within ASEAN. It's a very diversified basket. What we have also invested in is to make sure that since Singapore actually has a small landmass, it can use the landmass of India for its corporate sector. And accordingly for that, particularly as we get into new industry, we are looking at skill upgradation. And Singapore has been at this business for a very long time. About a decade ago, Singapore set up the 5 skill centers for India were the traditional sector in services and some manufacturing. And today we are going to get into the advanced area. So what we've always done is to not only build the foundations of the relation, but also to have steps forward. The kind of interaction that we have at the ministerial roundtable, which that together in a very comprehensive manner, you can discuss these packages that you need to develop for today's kind of industry to develop. And of course, finally, I think what makes this relationship very, very unique is a strong, and Professor Swan Singh also mentioned about it, is the people-to-people exchanges and the deep relations, historical, civilizational ties.
Absolutely. Okay, so this point, Professor Singh, that Ambassador Bhattacharya talked about, also the engagements with the political leadership this time around, and the way we just saw Prime Minister Narendra Modi being accorded a red carpet ceremonial reception at the Parliament of Singapore. So what does this really indicate? The political, the engagements with the top political leadership under the regime of new Prime Minister that has taken over there.
Yeah, thank you, Sakal, for mentioning that new regime that has taken over recently under Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. If you remember, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi loves to make very personal, strong relationship with world leaders. So we already have a very robust relationship with Singapore in all kinds of sectors. I think number one significance of this visit would be that he will be able to build a very personal, strong relationship with the new Prime Minister. And just like India has had political stability and Prime Minister is now in his 3rd term, Singapore has also usually seen long-term leaders staying on course in that sense. So building personal rapport, personal bonhomie, and personal understanding with the new Prime Minister would be, to me, apparently most important. Of course, the Prime Minister is not completely new. He's been Singapore's finance minister for the last 4 years. And understand, we keep celebrating India's 2+2 relationships where foreign and defense ministers have meetings with Australia, with Japan, with the United States. With Singapore, last week only we had 4 ministers, 4 senior ministers preceding Prime Minister's visit.
Okay.
I'm sure a lot of things that are going to be sort of clenched and signed now during the visit of Prime Minister were finalized during those 4 ministers being in Singapore. So I think apex level leaders really building personal bonhomie and then accelerating the pace and the whole scope of relationship is what is most significant in this visit of the Prime Minister, which is going to take forward already very robust relationship with Singapore.
Absolutely. And that robust relationship, Ambassador Bhattacharya, also is further bolstered by the presence of robust Indian diaspora there. Ambassador Bhattacharya, you see the trends that we have seen in the last 5 to 10 years, exponential rise, and how I think if I'm not mistaken, Singapore could be one of the only non-Indian cities which has seen the largest concentration of IITians and IIMs making Singapore their home. And they matter a lot to them, isn't it?
Yes, Singapore has been a very embracing society. In a very cosmopolitan community has developed over time. Given the constraints of population in Singapore, they had adopted a policy in which they would actually encourage immigrations, particularly of highly qualified professionals. And India has had a very fair share of these immigrants, of professionals coming into Singapore, many of whom have become Singapore nationals over a period of time. And they add immensely not only to the vitality and dynamism in Singapore and its economy and its polity, but what they also do is they carry back with them those same traditions when the exchanges happen at a bilateral level. This is to supplement the already very deep cultural relations that India and Singapore have had for centuries, actually, because since the beginning of the millennia, we've had exchanges with Singapore, which have been cultural and ideological, the spread of our faiths over there. And these have developed. The Srivijaya Empire, which was centered around that region, extended across Malaya and Indonesia, was based on these Indian principles. And those still Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose had a very strong presence in Singapore, and that is still remembered even to this day. So what we have today, and that is why I really love this relationship, the joyfulness and the mirth of this relationship, which is always looking towards the future. And from that kind of partnership that we've had in the past, we've now moved to one in which we are collaborating with professionals in the world of finance and medicine, in the world of management, in the world of technology, the kind of collaborations that we today have with the leading universities of Singapore, with research centers back in India, the kind of innovation that is being promoted is again directed towards energizing the economies and the contribution that both can make to regional and global affairs.
Yes, Professor Swaran Singh and Ambassador Bhattacharya, please stay standby, and I would really appreciate your patience. We're getting some more visuals of the introduction of delegates from both sides, the Singaporean side and the Indian side. The Indian side being led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, interacting and being introduced with the strong delegation from the Singaporean side led by their Prime Minister, the newly appointed Prime Minister. Here you have him on the screen, Prime Minister of Singapore, Mr. Lawrence Wong, being introduced to the Indian side as well, which also includes our Minister of External Affairs, Dr. Jaishankar, National Security Advisor, among other senior officials of the Ministry of External Affairs. A while back, we also know that the delegation level talks took place. Before that, Prime Minister signed the visitors book, and he was also accorded a ceremonial red carpet welcome in the Parliament of Singapore. And we can continue talking to our guest as we stay with these visuals. Going back to Ambassador Bhattacharya and Professor Swaran Singh, we were talking about the new dimensions that are going to be added in this particular visit, and the fact, Ambassador Bhattacharya, that Singapore has been a traditional ally of India and the higher source of FDI. We talked about it, but this visit, how it is all set to elevate India-Singapore ties to the very next level. Ambassador Bhattacharya.
True. I think what we've realized is that we need to have a very dynamic approach. The global situation, including the global economy, is today in a situation of flux, and we need to have very concentrated and deliberate policies that move us towards the new phase. There has to be a big emphasis on manufacturing. Prime Minister has announced the Make in India plans, the indigenization approach, the kind of digital penetration that we need in the hardware sector, the kind of connectivities that we will need to achieve with our partners across the world, and the kind of role that we will then play in the geostrategic developments that are happening around us. But at the crux of this is the manufacturing boom that India hopes to become a major part of. The trends, as we know, is that the global slowdown has also had an impact on the Chinese economy. The level of investments that are going into China have begun to taper off, and a lot of them are going off to other countries. But also, many industries, many corporates are looking at business decisions which look at India primarily as a source of independent choice. Many of these corporates are based in Singapore. And as you know, Prime Minister is having exchanges with business leaders as well.
Right.
Outlining the vision of India as to how India will progress in the next 25 years or so that Singapore can be a more active partner in that. Singapore has been one of the most active agents of growth for India, and how we can enhance that further. So I think it's a big array of the package that we are looking at with Singapore is really diverse, and that's the beauty of this relationship.
Professor Swaran Singh, the China angle.
China, indeed, whether it is in terms of ethnic population of Singapore or in terms of their economic relationship, China remains definitely the big elephant in the room. China's trade, for example, is much higher. China's trade with ASEAN, I think, has crossed 900 billion compared to India's about 120 billion. So China remains a factor, there is no doubt. but India remains the new, attractive nation for much of the ASEAN and particularly for Singapore. With our 8% growth rate, with our cultural connections, and India's whole focus now is exactly what Singapore can be very complementary in delivering. Singapore has been, for example, very clearly export-driven economy, very advanced manufacturing, digitalization. These are the areas where India is trying to move to as it now wants to reach as the third largest economy. So in that sense, there is a lot more that Singapore can give to India, but also with 8% growth rate, India is also emerging as a country that can invest in other countries. So India also is going to invest in Singapore. I'm told about 9,000 plus Indian companies are today registered in Singapore.
Okay.
So not Singapore is interested in India.
So there are
India also has a complementary relationship with Singapore.
The complementarity between India and Singapore. To talk about that, we are also joined by our DD India correspondent Akshay Dongre. He's there in Singapore joining us live. So, Akshay, we were just discussing the new areas of collaboration and convergences and how this relationship, as MEA puts it, is going to take it to the next level, India-Singapore ties. So what are these broader areas that both sides are going to explore for the first time? Basically, the big firsts that are attached or that would be attached today when those critical MOUs will be inked. Akshay.
Well, Sakal, before coming to these broader areas, I would like to just touch upon the conversation that you were having with our guest as far as the mutual benefits of these relationships is concerned. Well, certainly, prima facie it appears that India is quite interested in the semiconductor technology that Singapore has to offer. However, apart from the technology aspect of this relationship, there is a lot of innovation happening in India as well that Singapore is interested in. Then there is a lot of capital that Singapore expects to flow not just from Singapore to India, but from India to Singapore as well. Now, Singapore has, a technological edge right now, but Singapore also realizes its investment as far as India as a partner is concerned for future as well. It's a long-term friendship that Singapore is looking at in terms of investment, in terms of technology, and given the fact that how China has been reacting in the Southeast Asia region, the kind of dominance that it has been exerting. Singapore, while it has close ties with China, but it does not want to put all of its eggs in one basket. It also wants to have similar kind of friendship with India as well to in fact balance it out. So that is one aspect of this mutually beneficial relationship. Singapore has a lot of technology, but what it does not have is a lot of land, not a lot of resources. So most of the things in Singapore are imported, and the reason behind it is Singapore's size is less than half of Delhi. So we can only imagine, having a country of that size, having such a technological superiority in certain aspects. But Singapore realizes that it cannot and does not have the potential to grow from where it is right now to a large extent if it does not have collaboration with a lot of industry partners and a lot of other large nations like India. It also expects a skilled workforce, in fact, to move from India to Singapore. And now coming back to your question about these broader areas, they are technology, they are digitization, they are projects related to smart cities, they are connectivity, there is health, healthcare here in Singapore is quite amazing, in fact. So all of these things are there, but from India, Singapore expects investment in terms of skilled workforce, investment in terms of opportunity for the companies here in Singapore to invest in India, to be a part of the Make in India campaign that has been going on since Prime Minister Narendra Modi took over. Back to you, Sakal.
Okay, Akshay, a bit more for the viewers who have just tuned into DD India, the engagements for the day 2, and we saw there are also on the itinerary, Prime Minister is going to be meeting or he's being hosted by the political leadership as well. And the way he was accorded the ceremonial reception at the Singaporean Parliament under the new regime. I think for optics, and it's also very important in terms of symbolism and messaging. Akshay?
Well, absolutely. It's a political message as well that though Singapore has ties with the neighboring countries. It has a potential to maintain strong relations with bigger allies like India as well, despite them not being connected through land or sea borders directly. But it has a close friendship with the Indian political leadership, and the kind of stability, that's one word, Sakal, that I've been hearing a lot here in Singapore, that the political stability that India has showed in the last 10 years is in fact quite interesting to see for the people in Singapore. Despite having such a diverse democratic setup, the kind of a unity that people here have seen in India, be it in terms of political leadership when it comes to national interest or other aspects of it, and the kind of continuity that in the government policies and in the government that the investors of Singapore have seen. They are quite enthusiastic of investing in a country as stable as India that does not have any ongoing crisis as such going on. So they're looking at a low risk area for investment, and that is why India is a very lucrative market for the people and the investors in Singapore.
So the political stability and the low risk investment, Akshay, that you spoke about, that India brings to the table. Absolutely. I would like to take this point to my distinguished guests on the panel. Ambassador Bhattacharya, would you like to elaborate or add to that point? India being an integral part of Singapore's growth construct under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
India has today emerged to be the fifth largest economy globally, and it's soon going to be the third largest economy. If you look at the kind of growth rate that we have, we are the fastest growing major economy. But more importantly, the kind of innovation that is happening in the country, the dynamics of our youth population provide that generation of wealth for a long time to come. And for Singapore, that is an extremely important aspect because of the limits of size that they have to contend with within their own system. And so when they come across a political system that is stable and predictable in terms of policies, when they come across an economy that is dynamic and growing fast, when they have an opportunity for investments in which the returns are going to be high and sustained, it obviously looks like a very, very good market. And finally, of course, a very large pool of skilled labor, and to which Singapore also wishes to contribute so that it stays more skilled and kind of can contribute to the new economy. So that provides the perfect recipe that Singapore looks for. The other thing that Singapore looks for is balance. Earlier you had raised issue about China in the room, and I see that Singapore has been this great balancer, particularly between China and India. And you have to understand, and this is Singapore's philosophy as well, that we don't have to see everything in terms of competition, particularly when you're looking at regional and global dynamics. There is a certain element of collaboration that can happen, and the cake is still enlarging enough for both these big giants, India and China, to have prominent shares. And so I think that's the approach that they have taken. In fact, their former Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, had said that when they were expanding into Asia, and they said the collaboration with India and China would be like the two wings of an aircraft.
Okay.
And has to take off, it needs both wings. They wanted both India and China on the table. Okay. And we did. We understood the dynamics of the collaborative part of this relationship. And it's not just competition, although there is competition. So we have to kind of emphasize the positive aspects of both.
So countering the expansionist designs of China is one aspect, Professor Swan Singh. What about on account of Myanmar? This is important. India-ASEAN relationship also plays an important role there. Just to get that dimension also into our discussion, Professor Singh, and then I take that to Akshay as well.
I think issues of the regional security definitely will be on the table for discussion. They must have already discussed some of these issues when four ministers, the External Affairs Minister, Finance Minister.
Exchange of MOUs taking place right now as we speak. Singapore, Minister of External Affairs of India, Dr. Jaishankar, exchanging MOUs with the Minister of External Affairs, the Foreign Minister of Singapore, the Indian side being led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India and the Singaporean side being led by Prime Minister of Singapore, Lawrence Wong. This is in fact preceded by the delegation level talks. There are reportedly 5 important MOUs that are being exchanged. We'll get you the details of that also in a bit. The Memoranda of Understanding or MOUs signed for important sectors, which includes reportedly cooperation in manpower skilling. There's also a lot of conversation revolving around the semiconductor sector. Before it's official, we are just showing you these live visuals of the exchange of MOUs between India and Singapore during the 5th visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Singapore. The MOUs will also be revolving around reportedly from skilling centers to training, recruitment by Singapore firms, skill development and other opportunities. A firm handshake. The top leadership of Singapore under the new regime, under the Prime Ministership of Lawrence Wong and the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. Okay. Akshay, would you like to come in here before the MEA makes an official announcement as far as what are these MOUs that have been exchanged? What more details can you share with us? Akshay. Okay, can we go back to Akshay in a bit? In the meanwhile, yes, Professor Swan Singh, your thoughts on it. The newer areas that the both sides have already decided to explore, including the semiconductor and promoting India as a manufacturing hub, advanced manufacturing hub.
Indeed, as Ambassador Bhattacharya was also saying before, the greatest deficit that Singapore has is that of land and population. And that makes India very complementary. Already India is the 4th largest home for startups and unicorns. India has more than 100 unicorns. So our youth is dynamic and the focus has been on skill development, capacity building and so on, which is where Singapore finds the relationship very complementary. And indeed, as Ambassador Bhattacharya also mentioned, it was the father of Singapore nation who had popularized this term that, India and China will be the 2 wings of the bird of Singapore taking flight to future in that sense. So what I want to underline is how Singapore has ensured that balance. Now, if you look at China's trade with ASEAN is almost 8 or 9 times, 900 billion plus, compared to India's trade with ASEAN being 120 billion. Now, when it comes to Singapore, it's not that kind of gap. India's trade is about 35 billion, China's trade is about 75 billion. So Singapore has already showcased that possibility of ensuring that balance. And as India now moves from 5th to 3rd largest economy, and it is going to happen faster than 2030, which is how most projections are saying. If you notice the kind of devaluation of yen that has happened since early part of this year in Japan, the kind of recessionary trends that are now beginning to be visible in Germany, India could become 3rd largest much faster than 2030. And that even if India will be distant 3rd, creates certain expectations of all other nations. How is India going to now differently engage with them? With that kind of economic growth rate, that kind of focus on digitalization, advanced manufacturing, skill development, capacity building, export-driven economy, that I think is going to make India increasingly more attractive for Singapore and several other countries. And that is why I think most of the MOUs that are being signed will focus on these how future relationship, technology-driven relationship, digitalization, skill building, smart cities, how those are the new emerging sectors other than cultural cooperation, economic cooperation, strategic cooperation, defense cooperation that has been happening, maritime security has been happening. But now I think it's going to be increasingly much more on advanced technology sectors, which is where India and Singapore would like to build their partnership, make them stronger. And I think semiconductors would be very central to that new relationship that India is trying to build.
Right.
India is trying to take claim in the world market on semiconductors, and Singapore can be a very good partner.
Okay. A very good partner also, Ambassador Bhattacharya, as far as the defense component in particular and the maritime cooperation is concerned. There have been regular exchanges as well on that front.
Of course, this is a partnership that has developed and matured over a very long period of time because of the very strong balancing role, as we were saying, that Singapore plays, and also because of the mutual complementarities. You would recall one of the earliest forms of cooperation that we had was to secure the Malacca Straits and the kind of anti-piracy efforts that India and Singapore and other regional countries were engaged in. And the first center for anti-piracy was actually established in Singapore itself, with experts from India participating in that quite actively. What we've seen over time is that this is now expanded into many, many areas. For instance, Singapore is one of the very few, perhaps the only country that does its air exercises in the Indian airspace.
Okay.
That, is understandable. But when we look at the broader issue of regional security and maritime security, the issue becomes much more intense because of the kind of role that Singapore plays within the ASEAN region and within the context of Southeast Asia and the interplay with China and other powers.
Yes.
For long has been a very strong partner of the Americans, and they have a very strong presence in Singapore as well in part of the strategic perspective. And over a period of time, these relations have also deepened with China. So the kind of activities that you now see in the South China Sea, you mentioned earlier about Myanmar. So some of these issues, I'm sure, would have been discussed, and
Yes.
we would.
You know that Myanmar point, yes, sir. Professor Bhattacharya, I'll just a quick pause and take this point to Professor Swarn Singh also. India's proximity to Myanmar and Singapore's association with it through ASEAN, you also think that this is an important, what you call, an important part as far as the overall India-Singapore agenda in the regional framework network is concerned?
Sakal, there is no doubt that India is very conscious of the disruption that has happened in Myanmar, but India has also been equally cautious in not being seen as overbearing actor in Myanmar's politics. World already has expected ASEAN to take the lead, and the rest of the other stakeholders, major powers, will play their role as supplementary role in that. And I'm sure Singapore being on the lead in that sense, in both in terms of its investments in Myanmar, its political relationship with Myanmar, and also the clout that Singapore has within ASEAN deliberations, I think that issue definitely will be on the table as to how we can make sure early stability in Myanmar is brought back, democracy is revived. Particularly, this becomes significant because of the disruption we have seen happening in Bangladesh, which was the recipient of 500,000 or more Rohingya refugees. And in that sense, increasing disruption both in Bangladesh and Myanmar would make India very conscious of seeking out, whatever possibility India can see, how ASEAN can play a role and how India can supplement that role. And in that sense, India's increasing engagement and, sort of acceleration of BIMSTEC, for example, is a part where these two countries sit together and discuss some of the issues which are very relevant for regional security, including problems of Bangladesh and Myanmar.
Okay, let's, gentlemen, take a quick pause and focus on the MOUs. That's the latest news that we are breaking on DD India. And I believe, Akshay, you also have the details of those 4 important memoranda of understandings that have been signed between the two sides. Over to you, more details.
Well, I've just gotten the documents of these MOUs that have been signed between the two governments. In fact, the first one is a memorandum of understanding between the Ministry of Digital Development and Information of the Republic of Singapore and the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology of Republic of India. So that means that the 5G technologies, the telecom technologies, the countries, India and Singapore are going to collaborate on that aspect. In fact, roaming around here, visiting different places, one thing that we have realized is that the telecom sector is quite advanced. It is as advanced as it is in India, and if these two countries come together, they can in fact reach higher heights. Both Singapore and India already have 5G technologies. Both are looking towards 6G technologies. So that is going to be a huge development in aspect of the businesses between the two countries. Also, it involves upskilling and reskilling, the workforce in these domains. The second memorandum of understanding is between Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology of Republic of India and the Ministry of Trade and Industry of Republic of Singapore. Now, that is going to be about semiconductors, as we have been talking, Sakal. That semiconductor is going to be focused between the two countries. It's not just the exchange of workers or setting up of factories, but also co-development and co-research in future technology of these building blocks of technology. Then there is an MOU on health. Between the Health Ministry of India and Singapore, that is going to be about training of human resources to provide better solutions as far as healthcare problems are concerned. After COVID, one thing that we have seen is that the government of India, while it had excelled as far as the bringing up of vaccines or development in that arena, but as the world gets more and more uncertain, the two countries can in fact collaborate on this aspect as well. And the last one would be about skill development and entrepreneurship Ministry of Republic of India and the Education Cooperation Skill Development Ministry of Singapore. So it seems that a lot of aspects, Sakal, have been covered by the two governments. In fact, be it connectivity, healthcare, upscaling of human resources, and then there is also about a semiconductor that has been one of the most important aspects from the very beginning of this visit by the Prime Minister Modi. Back to you.
Yes. Ambassador Bhattacharya, your take. Now, there are 4 MOUs. Semiconductor, of course, we have been talking about. Then the convergence in the IT sector, where it seems that both sides are all set to become the IT giants of the world, perhaps converging in that space. Then health and also skill development. How do you see this? Professor Bhattacharya and then Professor Swansingh.
Well, I'm not surprised that they've really picked these areas which are not only mutually complementary, but which are also future-oriented, because that's the nature of this relationship for a very long time now. I would like to touch upon each of these because all of them are extremely important for the complementarities that we provide each other. The first one about semiconductors. India now aspires to be more present in the digital space, and in addition to the software that we have great capabilities in, we would wish to acquire the hardware capabilities. And as you know, we have been collaborating with other partners as well, with the United States, with Taiwan, and now with Singapore, which are all the leading technology centers for the production of semiconductors, which is a key component in the digital space. The key collaboration is actually very, very far-reaching because of the kind of implications that IT developments of artificial intelligence, of the cyber world that come into, and there's much greater need for collaboration. A lot of this has been happening at the research level for some time. And I think what the MOU will do is to put it all together under an umbrella so that there's good guidance. And that's one thing that the India-Singapore collaboration has always been able to achieve. The skill development I'm very happy about because this, in a sense, upgrades the earlier MOU that we had. The earlier MOU was really one about traditional skills in services. But what this will do is take us into the manufacturing area. We had certain collaborations with them in hospitality, in some civil construction, some of the other areas of management earlier. But this will be specifically focused on developing the hardware capabilities. As you know, they also have, at the industry level, a very large number of skill collaborations. I'm interested in seeing what this health collaboration MOU is actually comprising of. I don't have the details at the moment.
Okay.
This would explore the complementarities in the field of biotech, in the field of bioengineering, which would also bring about, the digital aspects of bio world, which is now becoming increasingly more efficient in the delivery of health systems. And as you know, we have such a large country that we need to bring about these digital public goods as well. So there would be complementarity over there. I'm very happy. All these MOUs. Okay.
All right. Point taken, sir. Professor Swansingh, very futuristic, as pointed out by Ambassador Bhattacharya, and inclusive as well. Professor Singh.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed, Ambassador Bhattacharya has already covered MOUs on semiconductors and on skill development. Let me mention the healthcare sector. Pandemic had already seen enormous cooperation that India and Singapore played during that difficult time for both sides. They were both very, very cautionary, mutually respectful, and complementary as well. But pandemic also showcased that India was capable of, delivering medicines around the world, whether it is paracetamol or it is vaccine later, which, brought us this adage of India being the pharmacy of the world. But along with that, I think it's also important to see that India was able to build a very, very important open platform where, one could, deliver vaccines and medicines to nearly 900 million people in India and, of course, around the world at that time. Even before that, India had come to be known for medical tourism. So in that sense of healthcare, India has earned enormous credentials in last 4 years or so, particularly after and during the pandemic. And that should make Singapore increasingly interested in promoting research and development in various Indian laboratories. And that should make Singapore increasingly interested in promoting research and development in various Indian laboratories. And I think that is where this health sector would see enormous complementarity on both sides in terms of digitization, creating platforms, in terms of delivery, access, supply, and so on. But also in terms of research and development, I think Singapore would find India as a very significant partner. Indian doctors are indeed already famous around the world. You look at the British health system, America, Canada, Australia. So healthcare would possibly also be an area where perhaps India becomes far more important critical partner for Singapore. Not that Singapore is not bringing any value addition in that partnership, but that is, I think, an interesting, important area. Just like education has also become a very important and significant area of complementarity. Singapore has become a hub of education. It has given employment to so many teachers from India. A large number of students are in Singapore. So I think that is also part of that futuristic focus of education and health emerging to be very significant sectors for India.
So we have gone much beyond and above the trade and the investment aspects that have been traditionally very important component of the relationship between India and Singapore, and this time around semiconductor facility, semiconductor ecosystem and the convergence in that space is crucial. One of the crucial deliverables, and also the fact that Singapore has been the largest source of FDI into India in 2023. We're going to talk about those numbers as well, but right now we will continue to talk about Prime Minister Modi's visit to Singapore and keep getting you live reportage and visuals from there. But we need to take a very short break. I would request my guests to stay with us, as well as Akshay, reporter from Singapore. A short break. We'll be right back.